AI is obviously fundamentally changing how we all do and perform our work. For me, as a software developer, this practically looks like me using Copilot to assist me with writing, debugging, reviewing pull requests, and using the terminal. And this for me is not so significant of a change just because I already have spent about 6 years doing software development without any kind of like generative or agentic AI assistance. Now we have a whole generation of people entering into the workforce who have only just started to learn software development in this paradigm. So they've only ever used Copilot or any kind of other AI tooling to either help them write code or entirely write the project for them. And this was drastically different from how I got into this career because if I wanted to write a CRUD application, the closest thing that I feasibly had at my disposal was to use the template with Visual Studio that could build me a basic CRUD application that could connect to a database. So it existed in a form of a template, and you can download more templates online and code from those. But now it's changed from picking a template to providing a prompt. And that's fundamentally very different because not only, when I pick a template, it creates it and then I have to go and edit the files manually. But now with an agent, I can give it a prompt. It can make the whole project for me. It can then debug it, and then it can add to the code that I wrote. Now, there's a little bit of nuance to this, right? Because depending on the type of prompt or the way that I word my prompt, it might produce some code that may be different from the next, right? It's not deterministic in the sense that picking a template is. My action is not always going to produce the same result. But the fundamental change of this is that it shifts from having to fully understand what you're doing, and then it shifts it to just reading the output. And a template, you could argue, is a little bit the same way in terms of if I pick out like the .NET weather app template, and I connect that to a database, I containerize it, I do all those things. It'll write that code for me, but that's really the end of it. I have to add all my customization, all the logic on top of the template. The template's more or less just like it stubs out the MVC style, right? It gives you the controllers, it gives you I think it gives you the models, and it gives you maybe the migration or the initial migration script to run, I think. And then it gives you like the views, right, and all the HTML. But that's where it stops. But an agentic AI tool can essentially do that for you, but then continue on, right? Continue to add and debug and produce whatever you need it to. So if I need to, hey, add me a car engine service to do this, this, and this, I can just give it a prompt and it will go ahead and do that. And so we're looking at an entirely different way of programming, but we're also looking at a radically different workforce that's going to be entering in the market because they're going to be used to programming in this style. No longer do you have to sit at your computer and just kind of aimlessly go through Stack Overflow or Google searches. That, while it still is necessary to some degree, that a lot of that is largely being replaced by prompts and having an agent installed, either in VS Code or Rider or Visual Studio, whatever you're using. And that's way different than how even I got started. So obviously there's going to be a little bit of a disconnect between the current workforce and the new workforce entering in because of the difference in starting points. And I just don't see this being talked about a lot because we all have our different starting points for how we problem solve, right? If I'm used to having to first sit down and think about a problem and then look at resources, but if somebody else is used to providing a prompt, reading it, and then debug it, that's essentially reversed from how I'm used to thinking about it. So this may cause conflict whenever you're facing scenarios where you have to pair program or you have to work with somebody who is used to that style of programming, because the two people are going to be coming at it from different angles. They're not going to see eye to eye initially because they have such a fundamentally different approach to how they both interpret the problem, but also how they go about solving the problem as a whole. And this is the part that I'm trying to stay in tune to, because I think it's going to be like, I think it's going to be this about the same shift as like the generation, my generation, who grew up before smartphones. Really, we were the last generation to do that. I got my first smartphone coming into high school, I believe. Now kids are growing up with smartphones and tablets, right? We didn't have that when I was growing up. So I feel like it's going to be a little bit of the same shift where kids who had smartphones in high school are trying to communicate with kids now who have, smartphones when they were 5, right? There's going to be some disconnect because the person who had a smartphone younger is going to have a radically different upbringing with that smartphone compared to the person who didn't have a smartphone during all those developmental years. And same way with software development, if I started with AI and then I go talk to somebody who didn't use AI until the last part of their career, the career progression, the problem solving that went into growing into a software developer is going to be way different. And those conversations and the advice there is not going to be directly translatable. It's going to need to be interpreted a little bit differently. And now, obviously, this is all new tooling, right? Where everybody's getting used to it. We're seeing just an influx of AI into just everything under the sun, right? If it's if it's a website, you probably are seeing some kind of AI chatbot just spam you with, hey, you're logged in, can I help you with this, and obviously, this is nothing like new, right? There has always been some version of AI out there for years and years, but this form of AI in terms of assistance is relatively new, at least to the software development life cycle. And so when we basically onboard the next generation of software developers to replace the current senior developers now, it's going to look way, way different, right? It's also going to be very similar to like a shift from mainframe computing to distributed computing. It's going to be, I think, a little bit, I think it's going to be a little bit like that, I want to say. Now, obviously, I wasn't around really for like the shift away from like general use of mainframe computers. But if I read about it and I think about it, I feel like it's going to be a little bit like that, where you have two people from two different worlds now operating in the same space, and they have to learn how to get along and talk and communicate with one another. And I think it's going to be a little bit like that. So I'm still optimistic. I approach AI integration with a little bit of hesitancy, just due to the fact that it is still like very, very hyped up in terms of like what it can do and what it's capable of. And we are seeing, I believe, a little bit of like plateauing of like what AI models are able to produce. But I feel like, we still have to understand that these models are being built on what code is available currently. And so I'm hesitant to say that AI is going to ever replace like junior devs as a whole, which I don't think it should. But I think some people believe that it should just because of the code output that it can produce. But I just don't think code output is the true indication of like quality of software developer, nor do I think it's like any kind of distinguishing factor between a junior developer to, let's say, software developer 2, for example. So AI, while it's helpful, I still think that a core understanding of the fundamentals is very much required. And so I still would go back to the advice really that I've heard, and I would probably propagate as well, is that while you're learning the fundamentals of whatever language it is, whether it's C#, JavaScript, whatever it happens to be, I would really try to limit your use and exposure to AI tooling until you're able to feel comfortable with all the output that AI tool is going to give you. Because if I tell Copilot to, hey, write me this CRUD application to communicate with the database and do, XYZ, if I'm not comfortable with what the output is, and I don't feel like I can debug that, it really begs the question of, is this valuable? Because value in terms of software has to be looked at both from, what is the program able to do, but how maintainable is it? And if it's not maintainable by the person who provided the prompt, I would argue that it's not really of much value, because if something breaks, the a prompt is not going to be able to fix that error. It may get it right, but it also may get it wrong, and it may introduce more bugs, and it may actually end up causing real issues, and especially if it loses context for whatever reason. And so, if the main producer of that prompt, let's say a software developer, if they are unable to debug the output of that AI tool, I would argue that you probably shouldn't be using AI in the first place if you can't understand its output. Because how do you know if it's correct? How are you able to proofread what the output is? Or are you just blindly accepting the changes that it's introducing to you in your editor? And so it's very complicated, but these are the questions that we need to talk about, because, as we see AI tooling incorporated into GitHub in the form of pull request reviews, whether it's in your Visual Studio with Copilot, and all these different editors that are slowly incorporating more and more AI into the general workflow. Even on your smartphone, right? Like AI powered responses, AI powered summaries of emails, all these different things that have just been, just pushed on us so quickly. We haven't had ample time to just stop and think about it, and say well, one, do we need this? But two, is there as much value as we think that there is? I mean, true value. I'm not just saying dollar for dollar value. I'm talking about people's ability to truly understand what is happening. Because if we lose understanding of any of this, of any code, that I feel like is an inherent loss of value, because knowledge is priceless, right? And if you don't have a core group of people who can maintain the output of whatever AI tool, then I just am very skeptical of being quick to introduce that, unless you 100% know hey, given this output, we know how to solve XYZ in the event of some issue happening. So again, if you're in school, or if you are training to become a software developer, or if you already are a software developer, maybe earlier in your career, I really think that despite maybe the potential advantages you can get from AI in terms of your performance or how much code you can output, I still would probably try to stick with writing as much as you can yourself, and purposely and deliberately limiting your use of AI to assist you in particular things, and give it prompts in very finite and very acute problems that you're facing. If I need to write a method to do exactly this, whether it's some static method that's going to be some kind of utility method, whatever it is. That's the kind of stuff that AI is very good at, and I would probably try to scope your use of it to something like that, rather than just giving it a super, hey, here's my ticket, do this, right? Which I'm not. It may be able to do to some degree if it has the context of your solution, but I just don't know if that's the right way to go about it, honestly, from a more human level, right? Because if you don't have the understanding of the output, and you get asked questions about your code and you're unable to answer appropriately without the help of AI, then I feel like that's a little bit problematic. But people might disagree. I'm trying to think about this for myself, just for honestly, just to understand, the new reality that we find ourselves living in. Because all this stuff is so new, and it takes time to think about it. It takes time to process it. So, yeah, let me know your all thoughts, and thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.